Welcome everyone to the Adversity to Advantage podcast. I'm very excited because we don't even know each other, but we've been introduced by a dear friend of mine. So I've got Minter Dial on the end of the line today. He is an author of 3 books, writing more. You seem like an overachiever, if I'm honest. You're like all over everywhere. Like me, you've changed countries around 15 times. You're a traveler and like multinational. You've created a documentary film, you're a father, you like to elevate debates. You're also a podcaster, which I want to check out. The Minter Dialogue is your podcast. So I'm all over that. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Petra. Pleasure to be here.
It's so good to have you. And I know from our little pre-chat that there's like a million and one directions we could go in. I love some of the work I'm hearing that you're doing in companies around empathy, connection. You're kind of leveling up so many debates about how I guess we can be human. Tell us a bit about what you're passionate about. How do you like to show up in the world?
Well, so the truth, Petra, is I have this unbounded curiosity, which has made me try many things and be not good at anything. So I played a competitive level of tennis. I played 18 years of rugby. I played in a band and love music, but I'm really not the kind of, go-to musician, or, I was never the top player in any team. So I've enjoyed trying a lot of things. On an ongoing basis, I am passionate, I can say, and my wife will tell me that it's true, that of one rock and roll band that I have seen 200 or so times out of the 800 concerts I've attended, but just one band 200 times. And that would
commitment.
Make a reasonably good fan. But I would say that's only a small fan. They played about 2,317 concerts. I only saw 10% of them.
Okay, so you're breaking it down by percentage.
Yeah,
I do feel that that's kind of an entrepreneurial skill, though, that curiosity and that testing of so many things, and somehow being resilient enough that when, I don't know, 70, 80% of them just crash out, that we just kind of keep going, I'm curious, what's the next thing? Something like that.
Well, the way I break it down is I like to do things. So I'm not just curious, I do them. So if I
experience it.
Yeah. So if I want to try a tuba, I played a tuba. I don't play the tuba, but I've got the idea of what it takes to purse your lips, to push through and get that sound out of the boom, boom, boom. Or a clarinet, and then what's the reed, or that's in music. And in technology, trying out new stuff. I love Apple, but have you tried the Android? And so, fruits is not so easy. And I should say, in my past, I worked for 16 years for L'Oréal, but I also have done 3 startups, 2 of which failed me flamingly well, massive failures. So yeah, picking yourself up, leg between, tail between the leg. And at this point, I had to actually borrow money from my mother's second husband, who I did not like. And I especially didn't like having to ask for money to pay my debtors. And then I had to live at home for the first time when I was 27 years old, and I hadn't lived at home since I was 7.
And a lot of us would relate to, like, we're in the midst of the COVID-19 isolation, all of that is kicking off. And I know many people close to me and myself as well, our businesses are on shaky ground. We might have to look for supplementary income. Like, there's a lot of panic around failure, and not just because of the outside circumstances, but because somehow it still affects how we see ourselves, our own identity about what success looks like, even though effectively something on the outside, something external is affecting us in some way. So this is, I just think it's a really relevant conversation as far as how do we bounce back when unexpected things happen. But before we, sorry.
I was just going to say that I think really what's fascinating about this is that unexpected things always happen.
Yes.
And what's interesting about this one is that such a shared unexpected story around the world. And so what ends up happening is, since it's basically, let's say, between us anyway, in terms of our network, it's 100% of everyone's lives.
Yeah.
So then the real thing is, how do you react to it? Because it's the same. I mean, of course, we have different situations, and some of our friends or family may be actually sick, and of course, I have a few friends who've lost their parents to COVID, so there are differences. But yet, on the balance, the whole thing is all about how we react to it.
Well, it is, and I think there's an obsessive conversation around it as well, almost as a source of trying to belong. So people, you know, when you
Right.
have a shared little thing and it's usually something minor, perhaps a shared, like we both know one person who's introduced us, we could
Mm.
like just go on that conversation to
Right.
be like, hey, look, we've got something in common, right? And I feel like
Mm.
there's this pull of trying to find commonality, which can be supportive, but also has this tipping edge of
Mm.
if that's all you're now doing, you know, it can end up affecting our mental health in a big way.
And I think that piece that you just mentioned, Petra, is actually what we brought into COVID. I've been really startled by what I feel is a general sense of, on the one hand, loneliness and an observed lack of empathy. But that was real before COVID. And so what I
It's
feel
just
is,
heightened, right? Is that what you're
yeah,
saying?
it
Yeah.
was heightened and it's actually revealing stuff.
Yeah.
And somehow it kind of reveals a dearth of meaningfulness in a lot of people's lives. If you need to attach yourself to someone else's parents' sickness, and that's important to you, wow.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so it's collective, but I love that you said that, you know, we always have uncertainty. There's
Mm,
always something going on. Like people keep asking me in my webinar Q&As and stuff, like, how do we manage this uncertainty? And I sort of go back to, well, this is a collective uncertainty, but life is always uncertain.
mm,
You never know if somebody's going to lose their lives or become ill, or in a sense, even though the fear factor is heightened. So I really want to figure out, like, how can people bounce back in general? That's the whole theme of the podcast, is like, how do we face up to whatever horrific things might be in front of us, and they'll be different for everyone. But I'm just curious about like your childhood, like when you were younger, who instilled this curiosity in you? Were you in an environment that was just encouraging failure and bouncing back, or was it something you had to learn through your own failures later on?
well, I wrote a blog post about 15 years ago saying thank you to 6 teachers I had. So my life goes extremely privileged. I was born in Belgium, then we moved to France, and then we moved to England, and then I get sent as a 7-year-old who just turned 8 to
Boarding school.
boarding school.
Dun dun
Ta-da, down in
dun.
Dorset, England,
Yes.
and the first 2 years were fairly miserable, in that we had this sort of old-fashioned system, and the name of the headmaster was Haggard,
Shut up.
right? and corporal punishment was
Sure.
full on.
Not much
And
empathy for the
no, zero
separation and all of
that.
that.
And yet I had this history teacher who he was a colonel in the British Army. He had a mustache, and he would tell stories. I just hung on every word. And he was just so delightful. And he always had a pipe, and I felt like I was immersed in a new world every time I had that 40-minute class with him down in Swanage, Langton Matravers and Dorset. And then after Haggard left, there's a new headmaster, and he was delightful. His wife was brilliant. And so I ended up patching together a series of an amazingly interesting teachers. And I went to another boarding school after the Old Malthouse in Windsor, Berkshire. And my housemaster at Eton was a man called John Peake. And he was a force of nature. He was ebullient. He was always positive about searching for stuff. And the way he taught history, which is obviously one of my key topics in life, is
Sure.
that he would actually make us enact history. And so one rainy day, for example, he took us out on Durnfield Field, and he made us reenact the defeat, the first ever defeat of a British square, which happened to be against the Zulus in South Africa. And so there we were running around in the mud. He was in welling boots and telling us, and you had to come in from here, and lived that. And so I think these are these individuals who really drove me to be a more curious person.
I love that it often is just that handful of influences that maybe we didn't even fully recognize or appreciate at the time, that then affects us in a big way. But because it's funny, I'm one of 5 siblings, well, one of 10, but one of 5 that I grew up with, I know. And I'm probably the most curious, driven, pushing, like always trying to find the next thing. And it doesn't feel like it was a very environmental factor, other than moving so many times makes you adapt to change, right?
Mm-hmm.
But as you're probably aware, it has both pros and cons, right?
Right.
So you can,
who are you, right?
well,
You're always moving. There's nothing staying.
yes. And I got very adept at effectively being who the other person needed me to be. So how do you adapt into their culture? How do you adapt into their world, speak their language, and not be the different other, who's talking in some kind of different way?
Another
So
weirdo.
yeah, exactly. So now I have great appreciation for the work that I do in, global companies and, multicultural, and I'm able to adapt. I'm able to be in the boardroom versus down on the front line, all that whole thing. But in relationships, I kept being somebody who they wanted me to be, in those smaller friendship ways, until you do end up questioning, who am I in the midst of all of this?
Yeah.
Now, I know you've written some amazing books and you've delved into some of these topics around bouncing back, empathy, giving back, those sorts of things, self-development in a way, leadership.
Totally.
Talk us through, so you talked about some failed startups. Talk us through some of those fails. Like, what were the moments that you were like, fuck this, I don't know if I can move forward? It's that kind of podcast.
Well, there's nothing like open up. These are the feds. At the door. Open up! Feds!
Yeah.
That's the federal police in America closing down your business. That is a very sour day.
Who
when
does
that
that
happened.
start?
That was, we were in debt up to our eyeballs. So this was a travel agency for musicians and entertainers that had to pivot a few times. We pivoted foolishly, although meaningfully, to try to create a concert to end apartheid in South Africa for 100,000 people. We had 8 big stars line up, and the British Musicians Union saw fit to blacklist our concert, for which I had put down a $25,000 at that time, a lot of money, deposit on the Johannesburg Soccer Stadium out of my bank account. And so, we're trying to do meaningful things, but clearly not in the right way, not profitably, and with the wrong partner. Because one of the partners saw fit to steal all our cash and then all our clients, and then took a one-way ticket on our bank account, first class, to out Asia. He also saw fit, which I never understood, Petra, to take all my Hermes ties. I had 100 ties. I'd been a banker before that.
That's so random.
Yeah, we are.
It sounds personal. It sounds personal.
Well, it ultimately isn't a personal experience, right? Because my name is attached to this, and the liabilities were attached to me and my other co-partner. And anyway, so at that point, deep rock bottom. And the issue is going back and begging for money to pay off some of the debtors and the humiliation that included. So I went from being a banker in New York before that, which is how I had the money to invest in this company, then to go back to Philadelphia, where my mom lived, and was getting remarried, and had to live in a room in her place. And I loved her welcoming me back. Yet I also had to take a temp job. So I was a temp at the Philadelphia Zoo. And so I was a secretary. I became a temp secretary. And that's how I had to start bouncing back. And so that's a very different environment.
And it's not so much the external of what the environment is. I mean, we can see the horrific shift, but it's something in the pride of it, the status, the ego even, the success, the story. You love telling stories, the story that you get to tell to other people who are like, oh yes, how wonderful, and the feeling that gives us. And so especially for men, I think, but I find myself, I'm described as often quite masculine, so I relate to it 100%. Like, my work is my identity. Right. It's like I put everything into it, and it's like part of me, and I want to provide, and I want, all that kind of stuff.
Well, when you go from being, I'm an entrepreneur and I've started this company, and we're traveling, you have Madonna, Sting, Hunter S. Thompson, and la-di-da stuff. And then all of a sudden, what do? Oh, I'm a temp.
Oh, I've got nothing. Yeah.
Who? Really? That's what you do? Oh.
People do
I
have
got
a
you.
reaction as
Oh,
well,
got
don't
you.
they?
Oh, for sure. And as you say, I think men, will in general attach more importance to the external, extrinsic factors. I mean, I studied women's studies at Yale.
Did
That
you?
was my minor at Yale. And
Yeah.
it was probably the most interesting thing that I could have ever studied. In fact, I afterwards, I used to promote it, not in a woke manner, but for men to say, this is actually what you need to do. Because women generally study us a lot better than we study ourselves, much less the other side or
Mhm.
diversity. Anyway, women's studies, 1985, crazy time.
Yeah, absolutely. Wait, now I want to know like what you discovered. What did you learn about women that has actually impacted your behavior
Well,
towards women?
a lot. Okay.
Yeah.
Because, oh yeah. Well, I mean, I took 12 courses in it. And so there are many things like the politics of touch and how that goes down differently, and much more observant about how women are with women and how men are with women. And then the interface between men and women. And so, gosh, my language, my understanding of minority. When you spend 12 classes being the only man in a group of 15 to 20 women, you end up
Totally
saying,
agree.
well, what do you think? Whoa,
Yeah. And it's
heavy,
like you're speaking for all men everywhere.
right. And if you go back to like a board where there's one woman and 12 angry men,
Yeah.
what do you think? Well, there's a weight on a woman's shoulders because she feels responsible oftentimes for representing other women on that board, even though they're not there. I mean, of course, that's not always true, but there is that notion of,
Yeah. Yeah.
what
That
do you think,
expectation.
chick? And that's sort of the men will make that feel happen to women. So I've
Yeah.
observed that being a white male. I'm on many boards and as at L'Oreal, even though we were selling to women, through the time that I was there, only 7% of the senior managers were women at L'Oreal, even though
Incredible.
96% of the revenues were through a woman's wallet.
Incredible. That's incredible. And I feel like we could spend the whole podcast on a bit of a feminist rant, but let's circle back. Let's circle back. I know there's been some other things as well. So you've been impacted by 9/11 and by several different terrorist attacks and lost friends. Tell us a little bit just about the impact on you during that time.
All right. So I think just the quick context is, I'm basically a privileged white male, lots of really interesting experiences, explored the world, loved languages, and it all could look very rosy.
Sure.
And then I was on a sort of fast track at L'Oreal. At the age of 33, I became head of a brand for them worldwide. And that's kind of young to have that kind of responsibility, $400 million.
Yeah.
And then I'm loving it. And I felt like, this is actually a company where I don't feel like I'm working. The people I'm working with, it's just, it melds and it feels me. And that was a real awakening. I hadn't had that real experience before.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had this head office. It was a corner office, beautiful office overlooking Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. And one morning I look over to my right and poof, I see this big explosion, but I didn't think it was big yet because it was quite far away. I was 5 miles away.
Okay.
And
but you're right there in the city.
Oh yeah, and I had a direct line on it. And I call in my assistant Marianne. Marianne, and she comes in and she said, "Oh, there's been a terrorist attack." What do you mean that's a terrorist attack? This is like that, right?
Yeah.
I was like, "Oh my gosh, yeah." I was there in 1993. That's what this is. I was floored. Anyway, that then sparked a whole series of things. First of all, my office was actually only one of the offices in the entire building. It was about 50 floors, had a view on the towers. And so my room was constantly in and out. But in between the first attack and the second South Tower, I was alone in my office again. So I called up Paris, and because I had a big meeting in Paris coming up, and we were all worried about, stressed about that. And I called up Paris, and I turned around as I was speaking. So you like this big swinging dick in the big office,
Yeah.
Hey, da, 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 in French. And then all of a sudden I say, well, I'm going to have to call you back. I put the phone down and I look back out and I see a plane flying down. I'm like,
you saw it.
What's that doing? And I thought for sure this plane was like a security plane, or maybe what they have Canadair planes that dump water from them.
Yeah.
Anyway,
right, to stop
it didn't do that. It turned around and went in for the South Tower. And then all of a sudden, kind of my floor fell off. And as I'm going through this, and I'm thinking about the people who are in the building, because I had many friends who were in, of course, and 4 who didn't make it out. And I'm thinking about my grandfather's experience, because he was captain of a ship in the Second World War when he discovered that Pearl Harbor had been attacked. And not only did that change his life that day, he ends up losing his life as a result. And I was like, whoa, this is my moment. And I really felt like from now on, I've got to do what's important and meaningful in life. And so you can't do that 100%, but that was really a switch on moment for me to say, all right, I'm selling soaps and suds, making people's hair beautiful and clean, but it's got to be more than that.
So so you're saying it was a switch like that.
Yes, but not everything. Right. So there was a moment like, aha, all right, this is my time. I've got to step up. I'm captain of the boat. This ship
Your
is,
boat. Yeah.
I felt like, I was running this company. And so I did feel like I was beholden to my team, my clients, my distributors, and all this. And it's not like overnight I did anything right away, but things worked out that way. I mean, for 10 years, I'd been holding on to a story that I wasn't able to tell my father. And the story was who was his father and who was his mother. I was named after his father. And for 10 years, I had been researching the life of his father and mother, who both died before I was born. The father who was killed in the Second World War. And so I talked to 130 veterans of the Second World War, people who knew my grandparents. I got their story, and yet I couldn't tell my father. Turns out my father and I at that point were not particularly close, but he'd come to visit me in Manhattan on the 10th of September, 2001. And on the 10th of September, we had a lovely dinner. My wife prepared beautiful French food, and we talked about the Yankees, the beautiful fall weather, how business was going, the big meeting I was doing in Paris, and not a thing about the 300-page manuscript that I'd written about his parents. Yeah. And the stories, the love letters, the everything. And then the next day happens, his plane's canceled, and he comes back for dinner. And that night, I just launch into him and I tell him, over 5 hours, everything I discovered about his parents. And he started to cry for the first time in my life. I'd seen my father cry.
And I know that I'm imagining the chain of white male privilege where men don't show weakness.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it started me on a path to allow myself to cry more often, but I'm still not good at that, but I certainly developed that as that went through.
What did it feel like to have your father sort of show emotion and off the back of your research?
Well, to be truthful, the first point is a little bit of rejection. I rejected it.
Okay.
I was not accommodating. I was more like in my mode of, gotta tell him this story, because who knows what's going to happen. Well, also, who knows what's going to happen tomorrow?
We could all die. So there's almost an element of fear.
And, back to your comment a little bit before about we attach importance to this when it's a distant thing, and, how people in Minneapolis or where God knows where else were also feeling worried. Well, it certainly felt more real to me. And yet I didn't have a spouse, so I lost, but I did have friends who were lost. And so then I was talking with their spouses. So I was quite close, but not the first line, because there's a difference between.
Well, there is, but there's still, as we're seeing in certain cities with how lockdown is occurring, there is this collective fear in the energy.
Right.
And it's so palpable. I mean, I was in Kenya during 9/11, and it's a part Muslim, part Christian. And so the energy of like violence could break out, or this kind of what's going to happen kind of affect, just in the energetic field was so profound. And I think there's something similar happening now, which is we feel it. And so, yes, I get that you're one step removed, but you're in the city, you're in the epicenter, right? Which is where the heightened fear, but also the collective humanity, like all of that would have been so much more, and it already felt heightened even where I was. It felt heightened in so many places. But it's a real visceral, reflection. And in a way, you had that moment of reflection, and then it starts showing up in your actions, even if maybe you didn't, like in hindsight, we can go,
That's it, exactly. I'm rewriting history.
Yeah. I needed to be me. I needed to say the stuff. I needed to show up, like fuck everything. Like
That's
what's the point of life if I don't show up and be who I need to be or say what I need to say? So what was the gradual process for, because I know that you're authentic and show up and you teach empathy and your books are on it. And you know, that you've obviously gone on some kind of journey that allows you now to give back on a global stage, right? What were some of those journeys from being a guy who probably didn't show much emotion to one who needed to change his life in that moment? What were those gradual kind of points?
Well, a lot of them are, I would say, Petra, with hindsight, more easy to write. Because, for example, so I'm running Redken, this hair care company, and I'm just loving it. And our mission was earn a better living, live a better life. And it finally dawned on me the power of the second portion of that phrase. And the reason why that's relevant is that we always were that, but there was like a whoa, now this is real.
Sure.
And how did that come alive for our team? And we actually, because we're in L'Oreal, so there are 38 different companies, brands, and they're all systematized with synergies and back office, this and that, and human resource policies. So how, if I want to make my team live a better life, how do I do that inside a large organization that doesn't necessarily subscribe to that mission? And so I really pummeled down into that. And then I was sent to Canada to run the subsidiary up there. And the challenge there is I'm no longer one brand, I'm multiple brands. And I kind of felt a disconnect because it's hard to belong to everybody. And in fact, it's impossible to feel a part, belongingness to everybody.
That's true.
And within the story of empathy, the interesting thing here is to what extent can you allow yourself to be part of a tribe? Because it sounds exclusionary, especially when you use the word tribal. And the way we use these words, it feels exclusionary. So I was getting to this point where actually I don't need to please everybody anymore.
And that's a really profound thing when you actually reflect in the face of death, so to speak, or being impacted by it. And I think many people are reflecting on that now. It's like, well, how am I spending my time? Is my one life, the time that I have, being spent on impressing other people, spending time with giving, like doing all these things for other people? And actually, what's the life that I was put on this earth for? So it sounds like there was a powerful but slow process of discovery during that time.
And part of it was also sort of not being able to do what I wanted to do and feeling the constraints and fighting against that. And then what did that look like and how far did I want to go off the deep end? Because, most of the time I stayed on the side and didn't go off on the plank. And that plank of going into doing what's the only thing that counts. And my point at the beginning was about this meaningfulness is that I feel like there's a lot of lack of meaningfulness in our lives. And now we have this time, weird and collective, for inspection, reflection. And
introspection.
And what are we doing one time on this earth? So what is it that we can do that matters? And the key point, and when I say I like to elevate the debate, is to move away from the fear side into the hopeful side, maybe love side, if we want to be a little bit more hippie-like. Because, by the way, I didn't tell you who the band was. I was sure you were going to ask me, what band would that be?
Now you have to say.
Well, I do, just to satiate people's curiosity. They're a band from San Francisco that was born in 1966. The name was the Warlocks in their first instance, but then they became the Grateful Dead. And it's not insignificant because I think in both in 9/11 and this period, you mentioned it, we're up against death.
Yeah.
And the Grateful Dead is their philosophy, which I didn't understand right away, is once you accept that we will die, which, by the way, is the case.
Regardless of
then
COVID or anything.
Once you get through that, you can actually release yourself more for more enjoyment, which can include enjoying little things and silly things and light things.
Just letting go.
Right. Where I'm focusing the story, though, is to try to do more meaningful things because, let's say jerking off, right? Maybe it feels good, but it's kind of light. Let's go with bigger things, do things for other people, be more meaningful in your existence so that when you end, you can say, I contributed.
So what brings you the most meaning? What have you discovered for yourself that gives you, because I think it is different for everyone. I think there's
Sure.
some core principles around contribution, connection, being your full self, but that somebody could feel that running a fish and chip shop and be like, this is my, I'm feeding my family and I'm showing up and I bring light and, to my customers, like that could be their thing. Right. And
Yeah.
for me, it's like writing and being on big stages and podcasting and sharing a message and feeling like I'm there for people. Right. So what's it for you?
So on balance, it's about making people frown, but not frown at me, but frown somehow internally. Something shifts. And so my shift, the gear shift, is maybe down into third to go back into fifth by a fourth. And so I don't mind that little downshift. And that's what I try to do.
Point,
that's it. Whoa. And then,
yeah.
and then rev up, because what I want to do is speed up. I want to elevate the debate after I make the change.
So
and
you believe more than anyone that a catalyst moment of like, can shake people maybe out of their habit sense and wake them up to the possibilities of who they're really meant to be.
Absolutely. And actually my new book, which is coming out on leadership, I talk specifically about this issue, which is that I've observed that most people who are on this little bandwagon, or maybe a big bandwagon of meaningfulness and purpose in business, have had a life-changing experience.
Yes.
Have had lost someone loved, have had a crimped life or health for themselves. And I consider having type 1 diabetes my sort of biggest signal of my mortality. And in dealing with everything I imbibe with an injection, there's definitely a feeling of reality to that for me. But my injunction in the book is, why wait to have a life-changing experience to move along?
Right.
And do it younger when you've got more force and energy, than think that you're immutable, invincible, and that the world is only for you. So that's what I'm trying to do. But so I'm explaining my issues and my life-changing events. And the observation is that that's typically how it moves. But it's so fascinating and powerful to be here where I am. So I'm trying to convey that energy and the zeitgeist of being meaningful and how that's cool to people who haven't got it without needing the life-changing experience.
And how effective do you think that is? Do you think somebody can get it? And I know not everyone will. And sometimes we are the seed that's being planted. We're one of those 6 teachers, that is having an impact, so that when the life will happen once, and it can be different variations of a level of like how bad it could be. And we were talking earlier about not comparing trauma, right? Like everyone's catalyst point can be a different sort of level. But do you think it's possible because I didn't wake up until I was dying, until I might've killed my kids, until I was like so at rock bottom that I was like, I cannot keep, like the pain was too much. I cannot keep living like this. I either need to like suck it up and die and take my life, or I need to find another way. That's how stark it was for me. Right? Do you think it's possible for someone to listen to us and go, all right, I get it. Like
something's happened. Well, so I'm conjuring up another book for next year. And so I am a fan of psychedelics, and it's awfully hard to explain somebody what it's like to trip who hasn't.
Yeah.
You can give words, you can show willy imagery.
Makes sounds.
Exactly. You can describe it all you want until you're blue in the face. I suppose it's sort of like trying to explain an orgasm until you've had one. There are certain things which sort of you need to experience. And somehow that experience, which is what forms us, I mean, we're structured by our experiences. Those are the most powerful changes. My hope is that by telling stories, which are a proxy for living someone else's experience, becomes a little seed that down the road, with other connections, because it won't be this conversation, but it'll be, well, this is the 5th time I've heard this story, this shit. There's something here. It's not Minter, but it's the combination of things. And then people are ready for it or not. Because if you're not open to listening and connecting in and being present as we're listening right now, then it's probably going to fly over your head, and you're going to miss the birds that are chirping outside.
Yeah. But even if you have the catalyst moment, you have the wake up point, and then things start to shift, there is still a journey of commitment to growth and being open and learning that everything's a challenge, and consistently educating yourself, experiencing new perspectives, and putting effort in, because you can go like this, right? You can do the like cavalry moment, wake up, oh, now things are a bit better. Comfort, peace, let's watch Netflix, everything's fine, right?
It's the gym membership.
Absolutely, exactly. You go a little bit and then you're still paying for it, but you're, until the next thing happens, right? Yeah. But I guess if enough things happen, like I'm just on this path that's about commitment to growth in some way, in order to effectively turn and I was telling you before, COVID-19, I'm a bit like sitting back, sort of observing people, going, this is interesting. And people being on the phone, like freaking the fuck out that everything, and I'm just like, but life was uncertain before. I don't know why anyone's surprised,
Well, I think, you and I, like in different ways, have had certain experiences that provides a little bit of perspective. I mentioned that I've been within proximity of 9 different terrorist attacks and had multiple friends die in them. And when you've done that, and the 130 veterans who went through those POW experiences, which, by the way, lots of Dutch did, and English and many other countries did, of the Japanese prison camps, it's like, oh, well, that's fucked. Okay, so what's bad about my life right now? And having some perspective on that has been extremely helpful. But your point is that, you don't just, it's not an overnight switch, as I said, but you strongly bring back the notion of how to get there. And I certainly didn't go on the path right away. And that plank was out there, and I wasn't always prepared to pay the price to go out and do things. And then little by little, I started getting more comfortable with the idea of being a little bit more messianic in what I'm saying. And I also think that being public about it is a key thing. So it's sort of like, I'm planning to lose 10 pounds. And you type publish on Facebook. Well, it turns out that there's a much high, I don't remember the number, but there's a much higher likelihood that you'll lose those 10 pounds if you hit publish in public.
Accountability, right?
Yeah. It's some self-accountability, imagined responsibility to somebody else now that I published it.
Yeah, absolutely. So talk us through, because we haven't got that much time left. I feel like we could talk all day, but what are some of the habits and practices that you try and put in place? I know there's quite a range for you. Maybe the key ones that have supported you through difficult times and allow you to stay in that mindset that we're talking about of changing perspective and being ready for things.
Right. So the first thing is gaining permission. So that's with yourself and with my wife. I've been married for 25 years, and these moments of selfishness where I'm going to indulge myself to take care of me. And we, and she's extremely indulgent of that. She's independent. I'm extremely independent individual. So first point. Secondly is I have quite a disciplined approach. So I like to get up early because I want to make sure that every day I do something important. So I tend to get up early, even if I'm tired, and I write.
How early is early?
Well, it depends. But let's say
before the day.
5:30, that sort of zone. Okay. And then I write until everybody's up at 8, and then I join them for coffee. And then I continue writing. So I know that in that space I've done stuff. Something important has been done. And that's what's most important. Fill the big rocks first. And so you avoid the little shit that gets in the way. Anyway, afterwards, I'm very athletic. I'm still able to be, even though surgeries all over the place. So I walk 1.5 hours a day. I listen to about 1 hour of music, usually while I'm walking, along with podcasts. Sure. I read voraciously, both books, online, whatever, it doesn't matter. Of course, I write. And then I have a creative space. And so while I say I've been playing guitar since I was 16 years old, so I'm a decent guitar player and I have a reasonable voice, even though sometimes my children think I'm just not that good.
Kids will always think
that. But they're right. No, but they're right. I don't have a brilliant voice. I have a decent voice. But the point is I have creative outlets. And so every day I play for half an hour guitar. And I sing my heart out, and a little bit like I'm in the shower, hopefully a little bit better. But so those are the general things. Make sure I get creativity and music in there. So it's amazing in COVID how, and in my newsletter, I talk about how we've had a release of creativity, and stars, the Berlin Ballet did the Beethoven's Seventh, with each one in their own room. It's absolutely fascinating to see how the creativity, and I think creativity is such an important human quality. So I want to tap into that side of it as well.
That's such a host of things. Do you ever have a bad day?
I do. Yeah, sure. Well, so first of all, sleep is a big deal, and I'm not a good sleeper. And so
Okay.
if I don't sleep well, I'm cranky, and that's not good. And I just don't feel good in my body. And if I haven't slept well, I often feel like I can get injured when I do sports, because I still play high intensity, high impact, like tennis, for example, or paddle tennis. Yeah, so I have my bad days typically around sleep. And why am I sleeping badly? Well, I'm thinking too much. I'm
Sure.
worried about other stuff.
Yeah.
And so I actually, the other subject I studied at Yale was sleep. And I think that was back in the 80s at the time, it was embryonic study. But I've learned a lot, but it's not because I know a lot. Just like my book, Empathy. Here's another thing. I wrote a book about empathy. You would have thought I would know everything about empathy, but it certainly doesn't mean I'm capable of being empathic all the time.
Yeah, it's funny that, because we can get the theory just right, but it's the experience as a lifelong journey of vulnerability, connection, putting ourselves out there. We are coming to close to the end of our time. So before I ask my final question and get your perspective on something, let people know where they can find you, where can they find your books, if they want to work with you, where are you?
Well, I'm out
everywhere.
there. Yeah, I'm out there. Well, I have the benefit of a weird name. So
That's true. Yeah.
minterdial.com kind of owned that space. And mdial on Twitter. On my site, you can find my books. So there are three. One is The Lost Ring Home, Future Proof, and Artificial Empathy. And I would really love it if people would like to take 30 minutes out of their day to take a look at my documentary film. It's VOD, it's like £1.50 or something like that on iTunes and YouTube and Amazon.
Sure.
And it's a documentary about my grandfather, Second World War. And it's all about love, courage, and honor. And I think we could do with a lot more of that in today's world.
We bloody could, which nicely leads into my final question. What do you think is a perspective that people can try on during these challenging times? And I'm going to just assume that it's some of the people who are amidst fear, panic, perhaps losing income, perhaps thinking that this is their rock bottom point. Like, what's a way that they could switch up their perspective, if any?
Well, I tend to orient that around finding your purpose, finding your North Star, your own personal one, and doing the exercise of thinking what's important for you. Dig down and then latch onto that. And then every day, make sure you're doing things that have it. It's not about doing it all the time. So my North is about connecting people and dots and elevating the debate. And so I want to make sure that every day I do that. And so how do I actually do that? I have a green person every day in my agenda, even these days. And the green person in my agenda is to meet somebody new. I want to connect with people and ideas and things and dots. And then when I'm engaging with them, I want to make sure I'm elevating the debate. So I have a green rendezvous in my agenda. It's colored that way, so I can see, and I'm accountable to that, to myself, how I'm doing a little something every day that fits in with my North.
I love that so much. And I think what I'll leave people with is reflect for themselves on what that North is for them. So what are those key elements that just make your heart sing, make you feel like you're contributing, whatever it might be, that's your purpose and value. And it's not rocket science, but it can be so hard when we're in the routine of life, and routine in a way has been disrupted. So now more than ever, it's a great time to just reflect back, take a step back and think, what are my things and how can I get creative at the moment, right? And truly put them into my calendar and my day, and you'll look back and your life will change. Mentor, thank you so much for your time. I can't wait to read your books. Appreciate you coming on.
My great pleasure, Petra. Thank you.